So let's just and the sound check we did, you were saying pie puppity pop. What was that? When we did the
I
sound.
was saying, Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled pepper. Where's the peck of pickled pepper Peter Piper picked? Yeah.
So
Can you repeat that back to me?
so that happened. No, I couldn't. But anyways, I there's a lot of words. Russ Harris is at 9 o'clock, I believe, in the evening where you are.
Hmm.
Is it?
It is.
It's
Melbourne,
11 in the
Australia.
morning, and this is called Cocktails and Courageous Conversations. Now, I am going to give away a little secret. This is actually Pepsi because I have a long day ahead of me. And so, anyway, we're having a cocktail, and you're drinking ale, right?
This is Stone and Wood Pacific Ale,
Oh,
made
yeah.
in Byron Bay, which has become a very famous part of Australia now that Christopher Hemsworth has moved there.
Oh.
It's a very nice drop, I must say.
Do you ever see Chris Hemsworth? Like, do you meet him ever?
Oh, I do a few
I don't
sessions
want
with
to
him
tell.
now. Only when he's freaking out before a performance, I help
I
him ground
know.
himself.
I know, of course. Of course, you would be his go to guy. We have our good friends. We have a lot of people here that we know. Ulrika is here, Camilla, Tony, and Christine. Oh my. Dove is here. Amin, good to see you. Francesca, hello. Ariel, Paulina, Camilla, Brit, Yvonne. There's a lot of people here coming
Uh,
to see my good friend Russ Harris. So I've known you forever.
Hello.
I think, well, for a long time, and I've had the pleasure of, working with you and alongside of you and being inspired by you on so many occasions. And to me, you are,
Yes.
I know many people see you as Russ Harris, the superstar. To me, you know this, you're a good friend and sweet friend, and you've been there. Um, so many times through ups and downs. So I think I see you a little differently. Not that you're not a rock star to me, of course you are, and you're much more than that. And so, for the sake of the people who maybe if they don't know you, like presuming that there should be one person in here who didn't know, who's Ross Harris. Like, how would you introduce yourself when you were kind of put on the spot like I am right now? How would you introduce yourself?
Whoa.
Whoa.
Well,
Pizza, papadi.
I would introduce myself as a somewhat silly person. I do believe in silliness and playfulness, and that may possibly come out in our chat tonight. Um, I would describe myself as a mad, passionate, obsessive fan of ACT.
Yes.
Um, and I would describe myself as a sort of recovering workaholic. I've kind of been living and breathing and training and writing about ACT for so long now. But as I was just saying to you before, I've just started kind of winding back on that and actually getting a little bit of work-life balance after all these years. So it's quite
You just
nice,
told me the
actually.
most crazy thing. You told me that you go off work on Friday afternoon and you don't work in weekends.
Yeah,
Whoa.
that's
What's that
amazing because
like?
it took a long time, it's because I've just been doing that for years and years and years, but like particularly when you're writing, it never stops and you come up with an idea and you write it down and then suddenly there's half your Saturday gone. It's, but I kind of, during lockdown, made a conscious, deliberate attempt. I'm not going to keep working weekends. I mean, getting old, it's life's passing by. It was actually really hard and I felt guilty and I felt, oh no, I'm not being productive and I should be working or writing or something, blah, blah, blah. But now I've really kind of gotten used to it. I like it.
I sometimes think about, I heard somebody say, this was not in ACT, but I heard somebody else say, because I do ACT trainings and all of that. And I also sometimes help people set up a business, which is not related to ACT, but, since I've set up my own business. And somebody said to me, or I heard it, and this is what I use all of the time, is the best thing you can do for your customers is to stay in business. And I use that whenever I price my products. The best thing I can do is to stay in business. So if I give everything away for free, there will be no business. But there's also a self-care part in here. Like, the best thing you could do for ACT and for the community is to stay in business and to stay alive and to care for yourself. And I love that you're doing this because, the world needs you and what you offer to the world. And can I just say, like, sometimes I get massive like imposter syndrome and a bit, is there something called positive envy? I don't know if I don't know if that's a word, but you give out more ebooks than, I have, I don't know. I can't compare it. But I would just say, it's amazing. Like, every topic anybody has ever thought about, like, you have an ebook and you generously share it with the world. So from me and the entire group, a huge thank you for your generosity. It shows that you've been working on Saturdays, and it know that you're lying away at night writing in your head, even, so just know that we love that. And people in the comments, I know Russ Harris is in our group. He's gonna read all the comments. Now is the time to share the love, and so that he will feel that it was worthwhile, all those Saturdays and all of those trips. You've been traveling a lot as well. And, just know that you are making a huge impact in the world with all of the work that you do. I shall not cry yet, Ross. You know what happens when we start talking about this. It makes me cry because literally, I'm so proud of you. I am so proud of you and all the work that you're doing. And it means a lot. All right.
Thank you.
And so, talking about writing, you just wrote a book, and I'm not sure if is out yet, but I read it because the publishers gives it to me so that I can read it. Do you have it yet? Do you have it in your office?
I do.
There it is, and it's just so beautiful. It's just so beautiful. It's a lovely cover. It's very arty. Cover. Yeah.
I kind of put my head against it and I stroke it and I put it on my pillow. It's such a lovely cover.
Like, you can go to sleep with it and you can put your head on it. It's pretty and it's cozy. It serves many functions.
You don't need to read it. You just put it under your pillow at night and sleep, and all of the ideas go into your head, and you wake up and you can do it. It's amazing. Yeah. I
love that. I shall now only sleep on Russ Harris books. I'll send you my books so that you can sleep on those, So Russ, could you tell us a little bit? So I know the people who've come to this webinar today, regardless of if you're here with us live, thank you for that. If you're watching the replay, thank you for that. What was it that made you want to write about ACT and trauma? I know that there's this kind of a story behind this, but what made you want to tell people how important it is to know that, okay, I'm just going to say anymore. I'm not going to say anymore because I'm kind of saying what you're supposed to answer.
You can answer for me. Okay. That would make the interview very easy, actually. Tell me, Rikke, why did I write Trauma-focused ACT?
It's because I slept on your book. I have all the answers.
Look, I wrote it because I thought there was a massive need for it. I just, I've been training this stuff for a long time, and probably one of the most common questions that just kept coming up again and again and again was, well, how do you apply ACT with trauma? How do you apply ACT with dissociation, with flashbacks, with traumatic memories, with dorsal vagal shutdown? And and I really wanted to write a book that helps people expand their horizons, just see how many different ways there are of applying ACT to the entire range of trauma-related issues. Because the problem is a lot of people maybe do 1 or 2 ACT workshops, read 1 or 2 textbooks, and they think that's ACT. And so they end up with a kind of very narrow focus of what ACT is and what it's capable of doing. And so it was kind of liberating to be able to write this as an advanced level textbook, assuming that people had most of the basics, because then it allowed me to really have a look. There's all these different directions you can go with ACT, and there's all these different ways that you can modify and adapt it. And yes, you can use it with complex trauma and simple trauma. And I guess the other reason I wanted to write it is because of that growing awareness of how so many different clinical presentations have got a trauma background. So the book's not just about PTSD. I don't know what my experience is, that PTSD is a relatively rare presentation of trauma in general practice, that far more commonly it presents as drug and alcohol problems, relationship problems, resistant depression, a whole range of anxiety disorders, sexual problems, and the list just goes on and on and on. Is that your experience too?
It is my experience, and I love that you're talking about this in a broader sense, because I think it gives us, like practitioners, a lot more freedom to understand the model and then kind of start using it more flexibly and think about the workability of the things that we're doing. One of the things that I love about and this is not specific to this book and this work, is like the compassionate stance that you're taking so if we dive into this, like people who have experienced trauma are, of course, clearly suffering a lot. And I love like the compassion that you bring to this and to all of your work. I actually remember, like, so we've known each other for a long time, and I've seen so many of your workshops because, I've had you come over here to Scandinavia many times, and I agree that there's been so many questions around this, so there's a need, I think, for the work that you just published. So we're grateful for that.
Yeah, and look, especially the compassion. This is a compassion-based, exposure-focused approach, and there still seems quite a lack of awareness about the central role of self-compassion in ACT, even though it's been, back in 2005, John Forsyth and George Eifert, in their textbook ACT for Anxiety Disorders, were very explicitly putting, self-compassion there as a central component. So that's like over 15 years ago. And, I still often kind of hear people saying, oh, yeah, well, I did this training and that training because ACT doesn't really include self-compassion. And I'm like, what? This is, like hair-pulling stuff, and so there's a huge emphasis in trauma-focused ACT on developing self-compassion. And of course, overcoming the enormous barriers to that. It's the more severe the trauma, unfortunately, the more barriers there are to self-compassion. So there's a lot of work on how do you actually identify and overcome those.
And I think that is kind of the experience. So when I've worked clinically, actually, most of my clients have been trauma clients. And I think that the self as context work, the perspective taking, holding your story, seeing that you can have your story and you can move on, and that you can hold yourself with compassion, all of that has been the most kind of important work, I think, that I've done with these types of clients. This week, like literally when this is being recorded, I told you this beforehand, I am literally with Dr. Edna Foa this entire week. I'm organizing a training in prolonged exposure, and I have myself been to this workshop, I think 10 times now, because I organize it, and I've had a lot of respectful conversations with Dr. Foa. I really admire the PE model. And also I see myself as coming to it differently as an ACT person. I don't know if you say you're an ACT person, but you know what I mean. And so one of the things in the traditional PE model, there's a lot of measuring of SUDS, subjective units of distress. And in what way? So I think this would be a question that many would ask. Many people who work with trauma or PTSD have been told that PE is the model, the way to go. What would be different in the approach that you're offering us in your new book?
Yeah, well, so that's a great question.
It's a
I
big
think that
question.
it might just be worth defining exposure from an ACT perspective, because there are a number of different definitions of exposure floating around. Now, in ACT, we would define exposure as organized contact with repertoire narrowing stimuli for the purpose of developing emotional flexibility, cognitive flexibility, and behavioral flexibility. To put that into layman's terms, it's like getting in touch with really difficult stuff outside yourself, difficult stuff inside yourself, and learning how to respond to it more flexibly. So that's the aim of exposure in ACT. Whereas exposure in many other models is defined somewhat differently. And the idea of exposure is habituation. You kind of get used to a fear evoking stimulus. You kind of get used to it, so that reduces its impact over you. And models that kind of use that sort of idea of exposure are very focused on measuring SUDs, subjective units of distress, 0 to 1 or 0 to 10 or 0 to 100, where 10 or 100 is maximal distress anxiety and 0 is no anxiety at all. And the traditional training in those models is that exposure is successful when your SUD score drops by 50%. One of the things I've tried to do in this book is build bridges between ACT and some very important theories that it's good to know about. Three in particular: polyvagal theory, attachment theory, and inhibitory learning theory. And many kind of cutting edge CBT trainings are now embracing inhibitory learning theory. It's very, very close to the ACT model of exposure. And the papers by Arch and Kraske are very, very interesting, because this is a theory of exposure that kind of casts doubt on this whole business of measuring SUD scores. What they find is that you could have a massive drop in SUD score during exposure, huge, and yet there's no positive behavioral change as a result. You could also have a session where the SUD score does not change at all, remains high for the whole session, and there's massive behavioral change as a result. So the SUD score is not really a good indication of whether exposure is successful or not. And so in Trauma-focused ACT, I've kind of suggested that you can continue to measure the SUD score if you want, but de-emphasize it. There are other scores that's much more useful to assess, because if it's all about lowering the SUDs, I don't know if you've experienced this. I remember back in the day before ACT, when I was kind of doing more traditional exposure, I would have clients where the SUD score wasn't dropping, and then I'd feel like a failure and they'd feel like a failure, and it just felt like the whole thing hadn't worked. So, I'm suggesting you don't have to give up on the SUDs, but de-emphasize it. That's just one thing. What's more important? There's two scales in particular I recommend people to use during formal exposure, like if you're doing exposure to traumatic memories, or exposure to difficult thoughts or feelings, or exposure to difficult situations. One of those is 0 to 10. How present are you? So 10 means I'm fully present with you right here, right now. I'm fully engaged in what we're doing. I'm embracing this moment. Whereas 0 means I've checked out of the room, I've gone somewhere else, I'm off with the fairies, I'm totally disconnected, disengaged from what's going on. And that's really important to track. If you've got a traumatic memory present, or really intense emotions, or both, and you can be really present, that's a really good outcome. And the other scale that I kind of recommend using is 0 to 10. How much control do you have of your physical actions right now? Because we know that, again, I hope people are familiar with polyvagal theory, at least to some degree. But even if you're not, you'd be well aware of the idea of a freeze response, how your body freezes up and locks up. And so 0 to 10, 10 is I've got control of my physical actions. I can move my body around. I can freely respond to suggestions from the therapist and shift my position in the chair and stretch and move. Whereas 0 is I'm completely frozen. I'm all locked up. I can't move at all. And so if we've got someone who in the presence of a traumatic memory and the difficult emotions has got a lot of ability to move their body and stretch and take action, that's a really good flexible response to the stuff that's showing up.
I love this focus on, I understand the thoughts and understand where all of that came from. And I really love the emphasis on the behavioral change, the noticing of how present you are, how much control you have over your body. And another thing that I love about this work is that there's a lot of focus on why, like, why would I do exposure? Like, what is the life that I'm not living? So we're not doing exposure to do exposure in and of itself. We're doing exposure to bring people closer to the life that they're not living. And I think that's just a beautiful part of this work, is the values part, isn't it? Like, why would we expose ourselves? We do that in order to broaden our life and get closer to what is important to us.
Yeah, I mean that's a key point. It's so important that we never do any sort of formal exposure or even informal exposure unless we're in the service of living your values and pursuing values-based goals. What's the motivation to get in contact with that difficult stuff? And this is where a lot of therapists come a cropper because they haven't actually done that. And I mean, prolonged exposure, there's a massive amount of research showing that it's effective, but there's also a very high dropout rate with it. One theory behind that dropout rate is that because it doesn't include all that kind of values-based motivation and in the service of those values-based goals, why would I bother to do the hard yakka? That's an Australian term. there's a tree in South Australia that's called a yakka. It's very hard. So why would I bother to do the hard yakka? What's my motivation? What matters enough that I would? So that's huge. So I talk in the book about compassionate, flexible, values-based exposure, because obviously compassion, self-compassion is enormously important. And as we're doing this exposure, stopping and taking the time to practice those self-compassion exercises and acknowledge how difficult it is and be there for yourself in a kind, supportive way. So there's a lot that goes into it.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for, like, again, I think this is both so interesting and so important. And I have questions for you, Russ. People have asked questions. So I have one here from our good friend Francesca. She's from Italy, I know, and she lives in Finland. She's doing a lot of training, and I can say this to you, don't tell her, she's a complete badass. She's such a badass. I know she'll be smiling when she hears this. Francesca says, when we deal with trauma with a client, should we consider exclusively a traumatic event or also a learned pattern of behavior or actions like relationship issues and guilt shame related problems? And if so, do we address them differently?
Well, we want to address all of that, really.
Yeah.
It was a nightmare writing the textbook because I wanted to cover all of that in the textbook. I think I'm not entirely sure. I think it's actually the thickest ACT textbook ever written. I kept asking for more and more pages, and they kept increasing it. And then they said, no, we can't. And so then I wrote a whole digital ebook that fleshes out and supports the hard copy book. So, all of that stuff is kind of covered here. We cover relationship issues, drugs and alcohol and guilt and shame. And, all of this, the more severe and complex the trauma, the more problems there are going to be spilling out from it. And one of the beautiful things about trauma-focused ACT is that a small number of core processes can be used to address all of those different issues and all of those different problems. And what it allows us to do is work on several problems simultaneously. Like if someone has, if they're losing their temper and also drinking excessively and also having flashbacks and panic attacks, then, a good grounding exercise like dropping anchor can play a significant role in disrupting and those problematic behaviors and helping the person reset and take a step back and actually break those patterns. So you can, apply it to many, many different facets all at the same time. So, it's again very useful because comorbidity is the rule rather than the exception, and it's very easy for client and therapist to kind of get overwhelmed by all the different problems that are out there. So another one of my tools that I'm very, very fond of is the choice point. And if you can actually map many, many different problems onto a choice point quite quickly over the space of 5 to 10 minutes, and get a snapshot of the client's life and all the different problems. And then you can sort of see that actually what we've got here is we've got at the bottom of the choice point, we've got these difficult situations, thoughts, feelings, emotions, and memories. And then when people kind of get hooked by them, they respond to them inflexibly, get hooked, fusion, avoidance. We've got all of these away moves, all these values, incongruent, ineffective, problematic behaviors. And what we can do is bring in our unhooking skills, diffusion, acceptance, self-compassion, present moment, and we can bring in our values and our committed action to come up with towards moves, more effective new behaviors as an alternative to the old behaviors. And so we address them all. And one of the issues that comes up is, well, which problem do you deal with first? And I think the answer to that is, decided by three things. One is, what does the client want to work on first? If there's a particular issue they want to work on, then I think you should give priority to that. The second is, if the client doesn't have a particular issue to work on, what's the easiest, simplest issue to work on? Because if we can kind of get some leverage, get some movement happening on that simple issue, it builds a sense of confidence, it gets motivation up, so that's good. The third thing is there a particularly dangerous self-destructive behavior like suicidality or homicidality that obviously needs to get preference over everything else?
Yeah.
So, I'm not sure if I answered the question there.
Well, I think you did, because I think basically one of the things that I think I hear you saying is, and that I love about this model, is that the strategies are kind of the same, regardless of the problem that you're experiencing. The strategies are kind of the same. Like, we ask people to, stay with their difficult inner universe. We ask them to choose and to take steps towards what is important to them. So that's what I love about this, is that you can work with, as you said, problems simultaneously, and keep inviting people to use the same strategies, like anchoring yourself and coming back to the choice point. I think you answered beautifully, and if not, I'm hoping Francesca will tell us. There's also a question from Francesca as well, saying, when dealing with trauma and ACT, how can we know which processes is best to reinforce? I think you literally just answered that. Where to start? Francesca, I'm choosing that was the question that you answered there. And then we have one from our friend Mohammed. Mohammed says, my question is, many of my clients say they passed through traumatic event, and they start telling me the story, and they did not show any signs of stress or being affected by the event. What is the difference between stressful event and a traumatic one?
Well, that's a really good question. And, in kind of doing my background research for this book, it was interesting because I read lots of papers and textbooks and so forth. And I found that the word trauma was not defined. Like, no one actually bothers to define it. And it's used with different meanings in different contexts. And so, for the sake of clarity in trauma-focused ACT, the way I've kind of defined it is, I've said, and this is kind of the general a traumatic event is an event in which there is perceived or actual significant threat, a significant level of threat to yourself or others. And that may be actual, or it may be perceived. And so a trauma-related disorder happens when, firstly, you experience a traumatic event, and it may be that you directly experience, or it may be indirect, as when a therapist hears a horrific account of something that happened to their client. So direct or indirect experience of a traumatic event. That's not enough for a trauma-related disorder. Then, in reaction to that event, you have emotional, psychological, and neurobiological reactions, which are normal and natural and expected responses. And that's not enough for a trauma-related disorder either. The third thing is that your response to those reactions is inflexible. You respond to your own reactions with fusion, experiential avoidance, unworkable action. And that's when it starts to become a disorder. That's when it starts to become a significant clinical issue. So, just having been through a traumatic event doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have an issue or a problem. And having a strong reaction to it doesn't mean you're going to have a problem either. It's when this psychological inflexibility starts coming into play against those memories, thoughts, feelings, bodily reactions. That's when the problems happen.
I love that answer. Thank you. Here's a question for you in Danish. I know that you have, I know that you can say one thing in Danish. Can you say my name?
Rikkes.
Yeah, you say Rikkes. Yeah, you can say a few. It's so sweet because you always, so my name is Rikke. Well, everybody knows that, but in Danish it's Rikke. And for people who know me very well, they call me Rikkes. And you always say that. It's so sweet. You speak Danish.
I can say smorgasbord.
Smorgasbord, which is more like Swedish, but anyways, it's kind of Scandinavian. And I think I've taken you to several. Okay, let's not go there. You and I have been in Nyhavn.
I can say some of those. I can say some of those words from that book of Danish pornography you gave me. But we might get banned from Facebook if I say those ones.
That's so funny. We gave Ross a book of Danish pornography. Well. Yeah, so that's how much fun we have when we're after the workshops. All right, so here's one. I'm gonna read it out loud and translate simultaneously. So bear with me. When a client has been exposed to massive like what is that word? Lack of care and being abused all their childhood, but today saying, I have forgiven. At the same time, the person suffers under their strategies and keep displaying unhelpful behavior. How do we bring those strategies and the blocks that are in there? How do we help the client to see and understand without ripping up the trauma? So basically the person says, I think I understand this question this way. It's like they've experienced massive, neglect and abuse. They say, I've forgiven, and still it seems like they haven't, basically. How do we address this with the client without bringing back the trauma? I think that is the question. Does it make sense, Russ?
Yeah, well, I think so. Good translation skills. So I think the first thing is always to get clear, what does the client want from therapy? What is a good therapy outcome? And this is where, I say there's the single most common area that therapists get stuck in my experience of supervision. Again and again, well, what does the client want from therapy? What outcome are they looking for? Spend a bit of time asking them if therapy is successful, what are you going to be doing differently? What are you going to stop doing? What are you going to start doing? What are you going to do more of or less of? How are you going to be treating your body differently? How are you going to be treating your friends and family differently? What are we moving towards? Once you've done that, then you want to ask, all right, so what's getting in the way of that? Let's have a look at the things you're doing that are getting in the way of that. And then we want to do a functional analysis of those behaviors. So if there's a particular behavior this client is doing that's holding them back from building the life they want, let's have a look. What kind of thoughts, feelings, emotions, memories are triggering those behaviors? And once we do that, then we can start working with the triggers or the antecedents. What are those thoughts and feelings, and teaching diffusion, acceptance, present moment skills. But that doesn't mean that you have to go back and explore all the painful childhood events. It may be that it's just emotions that are showing up as a result of that, or it may just be that there's a particular interpersonal situation that triggers this kind of strong fear response. So we don't have to go back and explore all the childhood trauma. We can say, well, how do you work with this fear response when it shows up in that interpersonal situation? Um, it may well be that as we do this work that painful childhood memories show up. If that's the case, then we can use simple ACT skills to help handle those painful memories. Dropping anchor, acknowledging the memory is here, letting it be present, coming back, diffusing from stories about it, practicing self-compassion in the presence of the memory. If this memory is showing up repeatedly and triggering over and over again these problematic patterns of behavior, well, then we're not dredging up trauma. We're not dredging up old traumatic memories. They're already there, in which case it's a good idea that we do some flexible, compassionate exposure around that memory. But we don't have to go back digging out what's showing up in the client's life today that's triggering the problematic behaviors. We want to make the client clear, how is this a problem for you? What's it getting in the way of? What's it stopping? What do you want to do differently? Those are our starting points.
And I love that. I love that you're talking about this, because I cannot stop talking about this in all my trainings, because so many people want to go back, and what I want to teach my trainees is to go forward, and to help the client go forward, to approach the life that they want to live, and everything that is in and of itself works as a barrier. It will show up, but start walking towards something, and what we need to work on will show up. Yeah. I love that you're talking about this. Then we have our good friend Marie, is also a Danish good friend. Thank you so much for being here and arranging this. It's for you and me. Thank you, Russ and Rikke. If you can find the time, I am curious to know if or how the polyvagal theory differs in cases related to specific traumatic events and long-term stress, respectively.
Well,
I could not answer that.
The short answer is I don't know.
Okay.
The longer answer,
I really don't know.
The longer answer is, I'm no expert on polyvagal theory. Trauma-focused ACT has a light touch on polyvagal theory. The most important things that we need to understand, in my opinion, from polyvagal theory is, what creates these freeze responses, how the dorsal vagus nerve shuts down the body, numbs your pain, spaces you out so you can escape the horror when you're in a situation where fight or flight won't work. You can't fight off the threat. You can't run away from it. The only option for survival is shut down, freeze, close everything down. And that's kind of the most important part, I think. And that little piece of psychoeducation, helping clients to understand that when you freeze, when you dissociate, when you shut down, when you go numb, this is actually your nervous system protecting you. This is this kind of, this vagus nerve, this second largest nerve in your body. It kind of kicks into action. There's this dorsal branch that shuts everything down, freezes you up, numbs your pain. And if you can just give it, I usually use the example of a bear. Yeah, if a bear's chasing after you, you're not going to outrun the bear. Maybe if you've got a spear or something, maybe you can try fighting the bear off. But the chances are the bear's going to crack your spear, overrun you, and start clawing you. And once you've reached that point where fight and flight doesn't work anymore, your only chance of survival is to stop struggling. If you struggle, the bear's going to just keep tearing away at you. So your nervous system makes sure that you can't scream, because that's going to annoy the bear. You lose your voice. It tries to cut pain off so that you don't struggle as much. It paralyzes your arms and legs so you don't struggle. And maybe if you lie floppy and silent and still, maybe the bear will leave you alone, or maybe it'll let you stay alive long enough for another member of your tribe to come and rescue you. And that's kind of why your body's shutting down. And that's why your body shut down during the rape or during the sexual abuse. Or that's why you froze when the gun was pointed to your head. And your kind of body's doing this over and over and over again. This is not a sign there's something wrong with you. This is actually a sign that your body is doing the job it's designed to do. And so that's the key thing. That's the key piece. There's so much to polyvagal theory, loads and loads of bits and pieces, but that's what I hone in on. That's what's most useful for most clients.
I love how you start saying, I don't know, I can't answer that. And then you just give us straight on such a useful metaphor. I love that. I love that thing about you, Russ Harris. Aren't you just wonderful in making something very complex, understandable for people like me and the people in here. Thank you so much for that. Maria, I hope you are, I hope that was helpful for you. Now we have Josephine, which is, I love this one because this is like, she will say, sorry for the mix up between Swedish and English. She has literally wrote half of it in Swedish, half of it in English. I shall try.
Is that called Swinglish or Edish?
Swinglish. Sorry for the blending between. Okay. So wondering if there are any. It disappeared. Okay. I'm just going to click back in here. Oh, I'm multitasking. Wondering if there are any particular things in regards to trauma-informed ACT to think of when holding a group space. So I'm guessing this is a person who does something in group. For me, it has now it's in Swedish. So for me, it has worked to build up a sense of safety and anchoring before we go into the more challenging exercises. I've also had to clarify the free choice to participate, and that the participants shouldn't go over their borders. I'm curious as what because I know what I would say, but I'm curious to what you would say, Russ Harris. In group space, any particular thoughts about trauma-informed ACT to think of when doing ACT in groups?
Well, I think, so what's the name of this person again?
Josephine.
Yeah, I mean,
say it in Swedish. Josephine. Yeah.
Josephine has already pretty much answered the question. That's certainly being aware of your boundaries and comfort zones and willingness to choose to what extent you participate is very important. And certainly making sure that the first thing that you introduce into the group is dropping anchor or something similar, so that if someone in the group does start having a flashback or a dissociation or hyperarousal or hypoarousal, you've instantly got a strategy that you can get everyone in the group to do at the same time that can help bring this person back into the room, back into their window of flexibility. I might just mention the ACT protocol that I wrote for the World Health Organization. So this back in 2015, I was very privileged that the World Health Organization asked me to write this 10-hour ACT protocol for use in refugee camps around the world, and they've been rolling it out in numerous refugee camps, and there's 3 published studies on it now. The first study, so this is a 10-hour protocol, so it's run as groups, usually about 20 people in a group, and it's all done by audio recordings and a little cartoon book. So they basically listen to audio recordings about ACT, and they look at some little cartoons that illustrate key points, and then they do the audio recordings, tell them what to do and how to practice the various exercises. So they do this for 2 hours a week for 5 weeks. And that first study, was with, it was in a Ugandan refugee camp, South Sudanese women, refugees, most of whom had severe PTSD and severe depression, lots of gender-based violence, plus all the horrors of warfare, plus the ongoing stresses of living in a refugee camp of 250,000 people. So it's hard to pick a more challenging population to work with. And so we really wanted to make sure, given that there's audio recordings, that this was going to be run by someone who was just a trained layperson. It wasn't run by a therapist or a practitioner. It was run by someone with 5 days of training in just how to run the program. So we needed to make sure it was really trauma safe, given that virtually everyone there has had multiple traumas. And we introduced, so first of all, we kind of, that protocol kicks off by making sure that people are aware that they have a choice to participate. It starts off by getting people in touch with the values that brought them to the group today. Here you are, you came because you care about yourself or you care about someone else, or probably because both. So you're already kind of living your values just by coming here to participate in the group. You're living an important value called caring for self, caring for others. And the idea of this is to learn some skills to help you deal with we actually, in this protocol, we called it stress. We didn't call it trauma because we wanted it to cater for everything, for depression and PTSD. So we just called it stress. And so we freedom to choose how much you participate, immediate acknowledgement of the values that are bringing you here straight away, and then we taught dropping anchor about 20 minutes into that first session so that everybody would have that as a fallback strategy if they needed. So those would be the three things that I would want to really emphasize. Yeah. What would you say, Rikke?
Well, I have not written a protocol for the. I was wondering, so if one sleep, I haven't not. Well, I actually have written a protocol for the region in southern. I actually have written a protocol, but I think it's much less known than yours. And so, but one of the things, because I love working in groups and I love teaching people to do group therapy or group or really group work. And one of the things that I want that I'm hoping that my students takes away is that if we go into groups thinking, first we have to make sure that everybody feels safe and secure and stable before then the sessions have gone by. So I would say, I agree with you. First, establish basic strategies as how to anchor yourself and handle difficult stuff, and then we actually do the hard stuff right away, because I think I turn it backwards. The more difficult stuff we do at the very beginning, the more the sense of security and safeness in the group actually goes up, because people see that the group trainers as well as the group participants, we can handle this. So again, it's just a little thing that I'm very passionate about. And that goes for individual sessions also. Don't wait with the difficult stuff until session, way down the road. Start where it's difficult and model that this is okay and we've got this. Does that make sense to you, Russ Harris?
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that. It's so important, because if you look at the broader kind of field of trauma work, you encounter this idea again and again that, the most important thing in trauma is that the client feels safe. And that's just ridiculous. I mean, therapy is scary, even if you don't have trauma. So your client is not going to feel safe in therapy. They're going to feel anxious. They're going to have anxiety, fear, particularly if they've been hurt by people they've trusted before. What we want to do is create a safe space where the client can feel whatever they feel and normalize those feelings of anxiety and insecurity and unsafety, and teach them how to have those feelings and make room with them and work flexibly with them. And I think the other thing is the idea that, again, you come up again and again, this idea that I have to spend several sessions building a rapport with the client before I can start moving into the experiential work. And I totally agree with what you said. Actually do the experiential work early on, and that builds the rapport and builds the
Exactly.
trust. And it gives people practical skills they can immediately take away and start using. Because otherwise, all of these 3 or 4 sessions where you're building rapport, they're still struggling with all this difficult stuff and they've got nothing practical to do about it.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for that. So, oh, there are so many like there are more questions that we would ever go have the. I just wanted to say hello to Raymond. Oh, Raymond, you're here as well. Raymond will be with me this afternoon again when we are with Dr. Foa. Monica is here. Marika is here. Peter's here. Vivi, Rita. Rita, you're also going to stay with me this afternoon. Natalie, Annie, Isa, Ilsa, Cecilia Schemper, Mrs. CFT in Sweden, Karina, Guru Prasad, Beverly, there's Tony, Kalyan. I just wanted to give a shout out. I can't say everybody's names in here. Just wanted to give a shout out to people who are here. And we're just about to finish up. Before we do that, Russ, and this might be a difficult. I hear that the way I'm. Now there will be a difficult question, Russ Harris. No, I won't ask. But it might be a big question. Could you tell us one of the things that I adore about you is that to me, as I said this earlier, you're much more than the author, than the trainer. You're such a you're a good friend to me. And could you tell us? Could you allow people to go kind of behind stage with Russ Harris and tell us about a moment that might have impacted you kind of in your life or in the ACT community or something like that. You can choose the level of disclosure, but I just wanted to invite people to see the person behind all of that. I know it's a broad question and it's very vague.
Well, it's interesting that while I've done lots and lots of self-disclosure at my workshops over the years, there are certain events that I never really kind of ever was willing to talk about. Uh, and I think a big moment for me actually happened last year, writing another book, writing the oh God, which book was it? I think it was. It's all a bit of a blur because in the last year I've written I've written 2 second editions. I've written the second edition of the Happiness Trap, and I've written the second edition of the Reality Slap, which is the book about kind of grief and loss. And I can't remember which one I put it in, but I finally decided to kind of just talk about this story, which was it was so shocking to me as a child. My my father was a doctor, but he had left the country and gone to live in America. And I was like 9 years old. And my mother was deeply depressed, and no one really diagnosed it. She was spending all day in her dressing gown in bed, kind of mostly spaced out on barbiturates, very, very strong drugs, much more, kind of very strong anxiolytics drugs. And I started wetting the bed and, going to school smelling of urine, so in these dirty clothes that weren't getting washed. And so it was a really period of like, losing my father, losing my mother, kind of. And then at school, because I was turning up smelly and dirty, I was getting teased and rejected by the other kids. And so it was a terrible part of my life. And then I remember one day and I got called up to the headmaster's office, and I was sitting outside his office, and the door to his room was open, so I could kind of hear everything that he was saying, and he was yelling down the phone to my mother, and he was saying, this is disgusting. His father's a doctor. He comes to school smelly and dirty. I've worked in the poorest schools in Liverpool, and I haven't seen kids this, neglected. And I'm sending the social workers round to your house. I'm sending him home now. Blah blah blah. And I was like so shocked by that. And so he kind of sent me home. And then when I got home, about 10 minutes later, my mother pulled me through the door and started like slapping me around and, whacking me and pulling my hair and telling me how disgusting I was and saying how ridiculous it is as a 9-year-old child. You should be able to look after yourself. And then kind of making me clean up the house, which was like this pigsty, and I had to clean it all up before the social workers arrived. And it was just when I actually I hadn't really spoken to anybody about that. I hadn't spoken to my partner. I hadn't spoken to my siblings. I'd never shared it at an ACT workshop. It was just one of those things that was just really pressed down and hidden away. And when I was kind of writing it in the book, I started tearing up and blubbering, and it was. And I kind of stopped and I did that, lovely sort of inner child exercise, that hands-on self-compassion exercise, which I've done many, many times before. But on this particular occasion, it was just so, so powerful, just reaching out to that poor little 9-year-old Russ, who was just neglected and abused and feeling bad and thinking it was all his fault. And it was I mean, I've done personal therapy and growth over many years, but that was just a particular powerful, very, very powerful experience, just in terms of, my own ongoing healing journey, which never really stops, does it? There's always more to work on. But that was a very, very it's in the second edition of the Happiness Trap. That's right. I just remembered now. Is uh, and I think just that even at the ripe old age of 55, that there's still this pain in there from stuff that's being shoved down and pushed away, and there's probably more stuff in there, but we don't have to go dredging it up. And when it shows up, and we can apply this stuff to ourselves, and we can work with it. So I think that stands out for me as a very kind of particularly poignant healing moment, I guess. I'm not sure if I was expecting when you answered the question.
Well,
But
these are kind of the conversations that you and I will have when we go out after workshops, isn't it? And I just wanted people, if we could offer a way that they could see something to get a more to see more than the writer and the superstar. I am honored that you showed us this little child, and I cannot begin to tell you how much love and compassion I feel for you and for this little child right now. I'm honored that you chose to share this with us. And all of the things that you do share with us, it is amazing. Again, all the writings, everything that you do, just know that it means the world to us. We're going to wrap this up now. I'm going to ask you to stay so that you and I can clean up the bar, and we're going to close this webinar. And please, guys, there's two things I want to say. One is that Russ is in our group and he will check the comments. And so please make sure that you put the love in the comments so that he can feel the love from from everybody in here. And also, I know that there's, Russ, you have your own Facebook group. Please don't leave mine, but and there's a don't leave my group, but there is a group called, I think it's called Act Made Simple, in which is it in that group that you are offering the trauma, the book circle? Where is
Oh
that?
yeah, so we're starting a reading group, a book club reading group. But yes, don't leave Ricky's group, Ricky, because
Don't leave my
they're very
group.
different. We're just talking. They're kind of different. The different vibe Facebook groups, and they complement each other well. So yeah, we're doing a kind of book club read through the book starting next week, and yeah.
So if you
So
look up the book, the Facebook group called Act Made Simple by Russ Harris, it has like 2 million members or something like that. Go in there and you'll find the reading club. And please don't leave my group. I said that now 10 times. Please don't leave my group. Feel free to do whatever makes your heart sing. Whether you are in this group, whether you are somewhere else, we love you and we appreciate that you were here listening to this. Russ Harris, to the moon and back. I'm so grateful to have you in my life, in all the ways that you are in my life. And for the people who are listening, so many people showed up here today and will watch this afterwards because you're you and because of everything that you give to us. So I hope you can take this love and, smother
I
yourself
feel
in
it.
it. And as you go to bed, because I know it's kind of late where you are now, sleep on your book and on all of the love from everybody in here, all the impactors, as I call the people in this group. So stay with me as we're going to close the bar. And for the rest of you, make sure to put all of your love in the comments for our very own Russ Harris. Bye,
Thank
guys.
you, Ricky. That was fantastic. That was
Bye.
very enjoyable. Thank you.